Well, our guest tonight is Jean Beaman, a sociologist at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on the program. Now, we've seen the far right record their best score in a presidential election to date. What do you think is behind this surge in support?
So I think part of it is the reception of Islamophobia and racist ideas in France. Unfortunately, this has become mainstreamed, and that's just reflected in some of the results that we've seen in the election.
But how have these ideas become mainstream?
So I think we can look very recently to the last 5 years with Macron and his use of Islamophobic and racist rhetoric in his discourse, in his political discourse. So we can think about, for example, his war against wokeism and Islamoclassisme, these sorts of things that are sort of, skirting the actual issues that much of French society faces and normalizing and making it acceptable, this far right discourse.
Do you think that this is as much a failure, perhaps, on Macron's part to mimic, I guess, the language of the far right as it is the left wing in France, who don't seem to have really had any narrative of their own to combat this with?
Yes, I think you can say it's both. I mean, I think it's very unfortunate that this does reveal a failure of the left to combat this mainstreaming of far-right ideology, but then also a failure of Macron to sufficiently reach out to people on the left to garner more votes than he actually received.
So why do you think Macron has, I suppose, shifted so far to the right?
Well, I think it's because that's a much more attractive platform, and much more he's able to garner more support that way than actually directly tackling issues of Islamophobia and racism in French society. I also think French Muslims are long used to being a sort of political football in these kinds of debates, and so it's very easy and tempting for someone like Macron to use them and deploy them in the way that he has.
Now, we've seen one figure on the left emerge as a possible, I suppose, rallying figure among the left, which is very deeply fractured. And that is the far left leader, Jean-Luc Melenchon, who came in a close third to Marine Le Pen in the first round. Let's first take a listen to a soundbite of him here now.
Ne vous résignez pas.
Do not give up. On the contrary, now is the time to act all together without hesitating. Democracy can once again give us the means to change our destiny. The third round of the election starts tonight. On the 12th and 19th of June, we'll have the legislative elections. Through these, you can defeat Mr. Macron and choose another path.
Okay, Jean Beaman, we've just been hearing Jean-Luc Melenchon essentially putting his name forward to become the Prime Minister of France. Legislative elections, of course, just around the corner, and he's trying to shore up support for that. Do you think he could make a good Prime Minister? Would he unite the left? Would he perhaps maybe resolve these problems of racism and, I suppose, a disenfranchised youth in France?
Yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic about that. I haven't seen evidence of that thus far. I mean, I think anything's possible, but there doesn't seem to be a huge kind of coalition behind Mélenchon at present. So it seems unlikely.
Okay, and just a very last question on the record high abstention rate that we've seen in France this year. What do you make of the fact that some 28% of people have just decided to stay away from the polls, not exercise their civic duty altogether? I mean, what does that tell you about the state of the French electorate?
Well, it's very depressing to think about how many people in France feel so marginalized and excluded from the contemporary political discourse that they didn't feel compelled to vote for either candidate. I think that reveals how many people in France presently do not feel they're sufficiently or adequately represented. And it's not a good harbinger of things to come for French society, to speak frankly.
Okay, Jean Beaman, thank you very much for your time here on France 24.